Hey everyone, I'm Walt, one of the High Rock pastors. I hope that you, your family, and your loved ones had a very Merry Christmas yesterday. But now, here we are, December 26th, the day after. And unless you're watching from the UK, in which case a happy Boxing Day to you, today can feel like a little bit of a letdown. We've just had this whole holiday season building up to yesterday, and it truly does feel like the most wonderful time of the year. Got Thanksgiving and Friendsgivings, the Jog for Joy, Advent wreaths, carols and cookies, ugly sweater parties, my personal favorite, Ho Ho Hope and Soap, Christmas Eve celebrations, and then the pinnacle of it all, Christmas Day. There is so much fun and community and rich tradition packed into the space of just a few weeks. But today, that's all in the rear view. When I was a kid, I was so impatient I couldn't even wait until the 26th to start feeling bummed out. My sadness began as soon as the last present was unwrapped, so much so that my mom learned to hide other presents around the house that Santa must have dropped, so my tears would be delayed a little bit longer. Now, these days, I can usually make it through the whole day without crying, but I still feel this yearning to draw out the joy and delight of Christmas for as long as I can. And even though I still love getting presents, the stakes feel a lot higher now than they did when I was a kid. Because for me, now the Christmas season isn't just about getting something new, a new video game or toy or whatever. Now the Christmas season is about experiencing something new, a new kind of life, a break from the grind, a time to connect with people and connect with God in ways that can feel elusive during the rest of the year. The Christmas season, it just hits different. And that's because Christmas offers something different. Hope, joy, peace, love, light coming into the darkness. It's this beautiful crescendo. And now it's over. And I confess that life on the other side of it can sometimes feel like a letdown. Because now we're going back to normal. For a while, this phrase has signaled a return to something good, but as we've probably all been realizing, the new normal doesn't feel that great. Is there anything different after Christmas, or are things pretty much the same? We're being told to prepare for another difficult winter of navigating COVID and social distancing. Many of our social and political problems are still the same. Maybe you've made some relational headway this past month, but it's certainly possible that some of the same family or marital challenges are still there, and perhaps they were even exacerbated by the holidays. And if you're watching from Boston, well, there's nothing quite like a 4 p.m. sunset, is there? Breathtaking. So how are you feeling today? Are you looking ahead to the coming weeks with excitement? Maybe for you, you're just relieved that the holidays are over, or maybe, like me, you're beginning to feel the letdown. I'd love to give you a moment to talk about this with those around you or in the chat. Welcome back. This Advent season, we've gotten to hear some amazing sermons from our Rev 7 faculty. If you missed any, you definitely got to go check them out. They'll be like little bonus presents for you. Each of our preachers helped me appreciate that very first Christmas even more deeply. How Christmas is about the God who had everything coming to those who had nothing, the insider coming to the outsider. How Jesus willingly entered into darkness and death so their power could be undone forever. How Christmas is something to be experienced and celebrated as a community. And then just 2 days ago on Christmas Eve, Pastor Megan and Pastor Dave reminded us that the birth of Jesus shows us just how far God was willing to go to love us. That first Christmas was unlike any other day in history. It was next level amazing. But what happened next? Well, we know Jesus wasn't born on December 25th, but figuratively speaking, what happened on that very first December 26th? All of history had been building and building up to this incredible moment. Yeah, I think about how excited I used to get as a kid on Christmas Eve. I couldn't sleep a wink. But generations upon generations of people had been waiting, yearning for God to come and rescue. And that moment came with angels and trumpets and bright shining stars, epic. God had finally come, and now everything was going to be different. Or was it? How was the very first December 26th different from the days that came before it? Because honestly, there was a lot that was still the same. That first Christmas night saw two unlikely groups of people come together. The shepherds and the family of Mary, Joseph, and now Jesus. We've looked at this story this season already, and I want to look at it again now because it has a lot to say about today, not just Christmas Day. The fact that God announced this radical inbreaking of peace and favor to a group of shepherds demonstrates the dynamic of the inside going to the outside that Pastor Richard Lee preached about a few weeks ago. Our Advent calendars and manger scenes might be filled with some quaint shepherd imagery, but you wouldn't have seen any cute shepherd cutouts in the ancient Near East. These guys were way on the outside, the fringes of society. They were looked down on as lowlights, and if you were a shepherd on the night shift, like these guys were, it's because you were expendable against wild animal attacks on the flock. You know, I've heard them compared to trash collectors in our day, but do you know how much trash collectors get paid? Way higher on the social ladder than these guys. Shepherds were among the lowest of the low. And what happened after this incredible angelic encounter and meeting with the family? Was there some instantaneous reversal of the social order? Did they cease to become shepherds? Did the wolves lose their taste for lamb chops? No. After they beheld Jesus, the very first people to witness the fulfillment of God's promise to send a Savior, we're told they returned. They went back to their fields and their flocks. There was a lot that probably looked the same after that. Similarly, Mary and Joseph were also in pretty similar straits on that first day after the first Christmas. Even more challenging, actually, because now they had an infant to take care of. Their new parents, still displaced from their home, still in a manger, still afraid of Roman rule like all the Jewish people. And as Pastors Christian and Michelle reminded us, things are about to get a lot worse. King Herod ordered a massacre of infant boys, and this new family had to flee to Egypt to stay safe. It was almost like the dark was pushing back against the light. Have you ever felt that post-Christmas letdown? Because you had either hoped life would look different after Christmas and it didn't, or because you knew that you'd just be returning to life as it had been. If you feel like a lot looks the same after Christmas, well, you're in good company with those who were there for the very first one some 2,000 years ago. And if our expectation is that life around us will be different post-Christmas, that Christmas will somehow change our circumstances, then we'll be in for some disappointment, and at times, that disappointment can be downright devastating. You know, I told myself last Christmas that I could get through it because Christmas 2020 was going to be a one-off. Surely by next year, things will be different. We won't be worried about COVID. We'll have shaken off the emotional, mental, and physical fatigue of 2020. We'll be collectively healthier. We'll be able to heal some of our strained relationships. We'll be operating out of a spiritual surplus instead of a deficit. As we all know, that hasn't really panned out that way. Yes, there have been some significant changes. The fact that we've been able to host in-person worship services and that families feel like they can visit safely is a massive upgrade from last year. But a lot of our circumstances still feel the same. We're tired and stressed. COVID continues to take a toll. Our culture is still struggling under the toxic effects of injustice and distrust, depression, and greed. Many of us feel like we're in for another long winter. So what did Christmas really get us? Was it just a distraction or a momentary reprieve? Or is there actually something going on that can sustain us long after December 25th? It's important for us to see how the circumstances of the shepherds and Jesus' family were still pretty similar after the birth of Jesus, because that's the world we live in too. Jesus came into a world filled with pain and darkness and difficulty, and When they woke up the next morning, it was still a world filled with pain and darkness and difficulty. And yet, there was a remarkable difference. It was them. They were different because they had encountered Jesus, God's promise now fulfilled, and it radiated throughout them. The shepherds returned to the same fields, but as different people. They couldn't even contain themselves. Their joy and delight and amazement were on display for everyone to see. We're told that they returned glorifying and praising God for all the things that they had heard and seen. These guys might not have held their heads up high in public before, but now we are given this image of a joyful parade because they knew that God had come. Mary and Joseph continued to entrust themselves to God, even as they walked through incredibly challenging circumstances. They knew God was with them, and God was, leading them through intense danger until they finally settled safely in Nazareth. Christ's coming changed them more than it changed their circumstances in that moment. It filled them with hope and joy. It spoke of God's radical love for all of humanity. It demonstrated the sacrificial lengths that God was willing to go to bring about peace. It was God coming for them, coming for the world, and nothing would ever be the same, even if things still looked the same. Now, I know that for me, more often than not, I want Jesus to change things around me more than I want Jesus to change me. You know, it's good to yearn for change in this world. We've spoken about lament and looking at sin and injustice. Honestly, we should all pray for God's will to be done on earth as it is in heaven. But when I don't see that change happening around me, I can get discouraged. I can feel defeated. I can feel the letdown at Christmas, like this was supposed to make things different. Like I said, I'm not a patient guy. And yet, as I read this story of the first Christmas and the days immediately following, I have to pause. I have to consider that maybe I've got it a bit wrong. Maybe the hope of Christmas isn't about changing our circumstances. Maybe the hope of Christmas is more about changing us, changing how we experience our circumstances, because now light has broken into the darkness. Now, fear and death and shame do not have to have the last word. And when we encounter Jesus, we're given an entirely new way to be, an entirely new way to live in our world. And we are invited to see how God is at work in ways that we never could have imagined or expected. I hope that this Christmas season, you've been reminded of God's presence and the power of Jesus' sacrificial love. I hope that our Advent sermon series has helped you see something new that caused your heart to stir. And I hope that this season has genuinely been one of joy and hope for you. But now that we're on December 26th and looking ahead to the winter months, you may be wondering, how do I sustain this? How do I avoid the letdown? And this is where Mary and the shepherd's story is so helpful for us, because they continued to carry the power and hope of Christ's coming well after that first Christmas day. And they did so in some specific ways that we can incorporate into our own lives. We read that Mary treasured up all these things and pondered them in her heart. When I was a kid, I remember taking my Christmas presents up to my room and organizing them in this nice, neat little pile. And when I wanted to play with a toy or read a book, I would take it out of the pile, use it, and then I'd put it back. It was like my own little treasure trove. And in the same way, I can see this intention and care in Mary. There was so much to take in that Christmas, but she treasured it up. She pondered what she had seen, continued to reflect on it, and turn it over in her heart and mind. She savored this good news of great joy for all people, good news that she had experienced firsthand. She didn't rush on to the next thing. She didn't forget or get distracted. And even though her world was fraught with danger and difficulty, Mary treasured what she had experienced. And I'm sure that's what empowered her to walk into such difficulty and danger with a confidence that God was with her. Friends, we are reminded of the darkness every day. We can't get past it, whether it's the troubles of our own lives, the pain of our loved ones, the headlines on the news. Are we reminding ourselves of the light in the same way? Are we, like Mary, treasuring and pondering that God has come near to bring forgiveness and peace and new life? When we feel the darkness around us, the richness of God's abundant love is something that we can return to time and time again so that we can be sustained long after the holiday buzz has died down. Is there a part of the Christmas story that resonates with you, that speaks to your circumstances, gets you excited? If so, I want to encourage you to treasure that up, to ponder it daily. What would it look like if you simply took a few minutes each day to remember and celebrate and savor that gift? It doesn't have to be a big thing. It could simply be over your morning coffee during a midday break. But those daily reminders of God's faithfulness will be a game changer for how we experience our circumstances. The shepherds, on the other hand, they went the opposite way. They didn't ponder so much as they shouted it from the rooftops. And after they encountered Jesus, they spread the word concerning what had been told them about this child. It was just not news they could keep to themselves. Other people had to share in it, and they did. All who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds said to them. The movie Elf is basically on repeat in our house from Thanksgiving to Christmas. And as Buddy the Elf said, the best way to spread Christmas cheer is singing loud for all to hear. There's something really significant about sharing this story with others. You don't have to go singing in an apartment store like Buddy or parading through the streets like the shepherds. But there is a power to sharing about the hope of Christmas with others. The angels came and proclaimed God's peace and favor to the shepherds. They turned it around and proclaimed it to others. And eventually, 2,000 years later, that peace has been proclaimed to us. And now we get to continue participating in this proclamation. You may have realized, we love sharing stories at High Rock. Big stories, quote unquote, small stories, stories from kids and adults, from people of all different experiences. Stories matter because we need to keep reminding one another that even though life continues to feel challenging, God is with us. Christmas has, in fact, changed everything. Light is breaking into the darkness, and the darkness will not overcome it. At the most, you'll get a couple of stories from High Rock a week. But you have opportunities to share with one another every day in your small groups, over a meal, over a text, before bed at night, while you're in the car, simply reminding one another, here is where Jesus is giving me hope. Here is where I am finding light in a dark moment. Here's another story that I heard from someone else that encouraged me. And in difficult moments, those stories can be the difference between despair and hope. Advent has been a fun season for our family, but there have been some real challenges this past month. Times where Jenna and I have felt really destabilized and disoriented, and like most everyone else, our threshold for handling this stuff is pretty low these days. We feel kind of done when it comes to dealing with things like COVID scares, personal conflicts, health problems, and more. And in moments when those challenges are really in our faces and I'm pacing around our living room with exasperation, I've wanted to roll my eyes at our Christmas tree or Advent wreath. This stuff isn't changing anything. But rather than chucking it all out the front door, we've been trying to do something different. We've been trying to remind one another more of the ways that God has showed up in the past, how God has provided and comforted, how God has taken situations that we thought were doomed and brought good out of them. Sharing these stories hasn't magically changed some of these circumstances, but it's changed how we're experiencing them. These reminders of God's faithfulness have been changing us and giving us even more things to treasure up and ponder. As I've been spending time in today's passage, I found myself drawn to a really small line that never gave me much thought in the past. We read that the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all the things that they had heard and seen, which were just as they had been told. Just as they had been told. Through the angel, God had told them exactly what they would find, and they did. God's faithfulness to save the world from sin and death. This was day one of Jesus' life. And at the very culmination of Jesus' time on earth, 33 years later, we're given a very familiar line. Jesus had been crucified. It seemed like the darkness had overcome the light. A small group of women went to where Jesus had been buried to grieve. But when they arrived, they didn't find him there. Instead, there was another angel messenger, just like on that very first night. And he said to them, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here. He has risen just as he said." Just as he had said, God's faithfulness to save the world from sin and death. The thing about the darkness is that it makes me wonder, and maybe it makes you wonder, is God really going to come through? Will the light really triumph over it? It's that doubt that can so easily bring us down. But I see this pattern of God's to continually follow through, to continually be faithful to God's promises just as he said. And that's why I want to keep pondering. I want to keep reminding myself that Jesus is faithful and good. That's why I want to keep sharing stories and hearing stories, because each one of them is just another way of saying, just as Jesus said. It's like my mom hiding presents around the house for me to find so that my Christmas joy can continue. These stories keep us moving forward in hope. And then one day, when the light finally overcomes the darkness, we will be able to look at one another and we'll say it was just as we had been told all along. Friends, I cannot wait for that day. It is the day that Christmas constantly point us towards. So I invite you to let that hope sustain you and carry you today, December 26th, and every day forward from here. Merry Christmas.